The air in Lieutenant General Smorodin's office was as heavy and still as its owner. It smelled of old leather, expensive tobacco, and that special, barely perceptible note of power that eats into oak paneling and velvet curtains. I, Major Nechaev, stood before the massive desk, feeling less like a state security officer and more like an exhibit under glass. Smorodin was in no hurry. He silently studied me with a heavy, unblinking gaze, and in this silence the ticking of the massive grandfather clock in the corner was most clearly audible, as if time itself here was subordinate to the general's rank. "Sit down, Major," he finally said. His voice was low, slightly hoarse, accustomed to giving orders that brooked no objection. I sat on the edge of my chair, my back straight. My specialty at the committee had always been vague, even to my colleagues. Emergency situations. This official term covered everything that did not fit into the framework of espionage, sabotage, or counter-revolutionary activity. I was a cleaner. The one who came after to cover up someone else's negligence, panic, or madness, and to compile a report that would not contain a single superfluous word. Usually, my deeds smelled of gunpowder, betrayal, or simply vodka. But what Smorodin pushed toward me across the polished surface of the table smelled different. It smelled of dust, oblivion, and frost. It was a thin cardboard folder with faded ink stamps. NKVD USSR. 9th Directorate. And on top of it all, a bold red seal, top secret. Case number 00148. Object Morozko, the general rumbled. It lay in the decommissioned archives for 21 years. We found it by chance, during an audit. Almost empty. But what is there will interest you. I opened the folder. Inside were several yellowed sheets. A report on the formation of a scientific testing group under the command of Lieutenant Gorin. The goal was to test new uniforms and equipment in extremely low temperatures. The location was an unnamed cave in the Yakut Santarkayata Ridge. The list of personnel included 9 names. A list of equipment, from felt boots to a Sever-field radio. Everything was dry and military-style precise. A typical routine for its time. In the 50s, the country tested its strength by reaching the most inhospitable corners of its vast territory. I turned the page. That was it. Nothing further. No progress reports, no test results, no order to disband. The group simply disappeared from the documents, as if it had never existed. They didn't come back, I stated, raising my eyes to Smorodin. Worse, Major. They didn't even ask about them, the general corrected. In 1952, the disappearance of an entire secret NKVD group was an emergency of national significance. There should have been search parties, commissions, executions of the guilty. But instead, there was silence. The case was simply closed and filed away. As if someone very high up was afraid not of the group's death, but of why it had died. As if the answer was more frightening than the question itself. My analytical mind, accustomed to looking for the human factor in everything, had already begun to sort through the versions. Escaped? Impossible, 9 people in the Yakut tundra. Died in an avalanche? Then why is there no report from the search operation? Conflict and stabbing? There would have been traces left. Each version fell apart, stumbling upon the main anomaly, the complete lack of an official response. I delved into the papers again, looking over every line, every note in the margins. And at the very bottom of the folder, tucked between the sheets, I found it. The hook that fate had prepared for me. It was not an official form, but a crumpled sheet of paper torn from a notebook. A transcript of the last radiogram from Morozko, written down by the trembling hand of an unknown radio operator at the base. The ink was smudged, some of the words were illegible. Base, I am Gorin. Temperature -73. The instruments are lying. It is not snowing. We are in stasis. Do you hear? In stasis. Consciousness is freezing. It is not cold, it is peace. Then the connection was lost. I reread the words several times. Stasis. An unusual term for an NKVD lieutenant. More like the ravings of a madman or science fiction. And this last word. Peace. Not a cry for help, not panic, but some kind of eerie, humble statement. A chill ran down my spine, and it was not the kind of chill that comes from a draft. The official task, Smoridan interrupted my thoughts, is to go to the site, assess the current state of the object and the possibility of its further use. Compile a report for the commission. He paused, letting the official wording sink in. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Unofficially, Major. I want to know what made Beria's all-powerful department so afraid of one frozen cave that they preferred to pretend that nothing happened. Find out what really happened to Lieutenant Gorin's group. But your report, Nechaev, should not contain the words stasis or rest. Find a reasonable explanation. A gas leak, a cave-in, whatever. We will close this page once and for all. The order was clear. I was not an investigator. I was the gravedigger of an old secret. An hour later, I was already meeting my group in a hangar on the outskirts of the airfield. There were two of them. Professor Artemiev, a geophysicist from some closed box, was a short, fussy man in glasses whose eyes were ablaze with scientific passion. He was already unfolding maps and throwing out terms like cryogenic anomaly and unique fluctuation. For him, this expedition was a chance to write a dissertation that would revolutionize science. He saw the cave as a mystery of nature, not a mass grave. The second was Sergeant Volkov. The complete opposite of the professor. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from granite. He asked no questions, showed no emotion. He simply checked his gear, nodded silently to me, and froze at the helicopter's ramp, clutching a machine gun. He was an instrument, an extension of the order. A bodyguard and, if necessary, an executioner. I looked at my companions. One was seeking glory, the other was simply doing his duty. And I alone understood that we were not flying to study or protect. We were flying to look into the eyes of what the most powerful agency in the country had turned away from in fear 20 years ago. I mentally replayed the words from the radiogram once more. It's not cold, it's peace. The helicopter soared into the gray Moscow sky, carrying us east, towards the long polar night and the mystery covered in eternal ice. And I had a strong feeling that I had received this order not from General Smoridan, but from the past. Straight from 1952. From Lieutenant Gorin. And it was not an order, but a warning. The 4-hour flight east is not just a change in time zones. It is a journey into another reality. Outside the helicopter window, the cityscape gave way to an endless patchwork of forest tundra, then that gave way to a white, lifeless ocean of snow, ripped by the black wrinkles of rocky ridges. Here, in the heart of Yakutia, the land did not belong to man. It tolerated his presence with cold indifference. As the helicopter began to descend, I saw our target. Against the backdrop of a blindingly white plateau, a black hole loomed, resembling a wound or a mouth open in a silent scream. The locals, as I read in one of the old ethnographic reports, called this place on Ayatoyan, the mouth of the ice spirit. For the NKVD, it was simply Object Morozko. For the three of us, it was the final destination. The helicopter landed in a cloud of prickly snow dust. As soon as the engines died, silence fell upon us. Not just the absence of sound. It was a thick, oppressive, primordial silence, as it must have been before life appeared on Earth. It rang in our ears, making us instinctively listen for non-existent rustlings. The air temperature is -38 degrees Celsius, Artemyev reported cheerfully, barely stepping onto the snow. His face turned red, the steam from his breath instantly turned into frost on his eyebrows, but his eyes behind his glasses were glowing with the delight of a pioneer. The atmospheric pressure is normal. The radiation background is also normal. Unique conditions. Volkov didn't say a word. He jumped down onto the snow, his felt boots sinking into the deep, loose cover. The sergeant walked silently around the helicopter, checking the perimeter, his machine gun moving smoothly, as if it were an extension of his arms. His gaze was heavy, he scanned the emptiness as if he expected to see an enemy squad there. He was the only one of us who seemed to sense the hostility of this place. I stood between them, between scientific curiosity and soldierly caution, and tried to maintain my own analytical neutrality. But the cold penetrated not only through the insulated uniform. Something else was coming from the cave entrance, which was about 100 meters away. It was not just frost. It was an active, purposeful absence of heat. As if the emptiness itself were sucking the life out of the surrounding space. "We're moving towards the object," I commanded, and my voice sounded unnaturally loud in this silence. We walked in single file, sinking into the snow. The closer we got to the black mouth of the cave, the stronger this abnormal cold became. Artemyev stopped every now and then, checking his thermometer, and muttered something about convection currents and geological faults. -45, -47. Incredible. Right at the entrance the temperature drops by almost 10 degrees. This contradicts the laws of thermodynamics. But I wasn't looking at the device. I was looking at what opened up to our gaze when we approached the very entrance. The snow here, at the very edge of darkness, had been blown away by the wind, revealing the permafrost ground, smooth as glass. And on that ground was something that made even the enthusiastic professor fall silent. Traces. Dozens of prints of army boots and old, hemmed felt boots. They weren't dusted with snow. They didn't look fresh. They looked like they were carved in stone. Every print, every tread line, every curve of the sole was preserved with photographic precision. They were frozen. Frozen into the very fabric of time. And all of them, every single one, led in one direction. Inside the cave. "Look around," I ordered, and I slowly walked along the chain of tracks. They belonged to different people. There was a long, confident stride, probably the commander. There were smaller tracks, someone was mincing, perhaps carrying heavy equipment. I walked around the perimeter of the entrance. I walked around it to the left, to the right. The result was the same. Not a single track leading back. Not a single one. "Volkov?" I called. "There are no other entrances, Comrade Major," the sergeant responded dully. "The rock is monolithic. There is only one exit. The one they entered." My mind, trained to search for logical explanations, began to work feverishly. A collapse? Could it have sealed the exit? But then why was there no trace of the search party that was supposed to have been sent? Another, unknown exit that was later blocked? Possible, but unlikely. And why was there complete silence in the case? Unique cryopreservation. Artemiev broke the silence. He knelt down by one of the tracks, almost touching it with his nose. Do you understand what this means? No weathering, no erosion. These prints could have been left yesterday or 100 years ago. This is the perfect laboratory for studying the past. We need to understand why no one came out, Professor, I interrupted. My tone was harsher than I intended. Volkov, you said the locals were afraid of this place. Why? The sergeant paused, as if choosing his words. The old people say it's Yusadon, the soul eater. They say the mountain takes away heat. Not from the body, but from within. A person goes in and feels so good, so calm, that he doesn't want to leave. He just sits down and waits. Nonsense, Artemiev snorted, rising to his feet. Primitive animism. There's a scientific explanation for everything. There's probably a release of some kind of natural gas in the cave. Colorless, odorless. Causes euphoria, then suffocation. A classic case. I looked at the tracks, then at the dark cavern. The gas version sounded plausible. Rational. It would explain the lack of panic and perhaps even the strange words in Gorin's radiogram. But something inside me resisted this explanation. It was too simple. Too convenient. It did not explain the main thing, why the all-powerful NKVD was so afraid of ordinary gas that it preferred to bury this story in the archives. The cold was growing. I felt it in my bones now, not my skin. It was irrational, visceral. It was like being watched. Not by a pair of eyes, but by something vast and ancient and utterly uncaring. I have made a decision. Preparing to enter. Professor, is your equipment ready? Volkov, you go first. Check the lights. Communications every 15 minutes. Artemiev bustled about, happily checking his instruments. Volkov silently clicked the bolt of his machine gun. I looked one last time at the clear, indifferent sky, and then at the chain of tracks leading off into the darkness. They looked like an invitation. Or a gravestone. We were standing on the threshold of a mystery, and I understood that we had only two paths. Either we would find a rational explanation for it, as General Smorodin's order demanded. Or it would find us, as it had found 9 people from Lieutenant Gorin's group 21 years ago. Forward, I said, and we stepped from the world of light into the world of eternal cold, following exactly in the footsteps of those who would never return from here. Dozens of prints of army boots and old, hemmed felt boots. They weren't dusted with snow. They didn't look fresh. They looked like they were carved in stone. Every print, every tread line, every curve of the sole was preserved with photographic precision. They were frozen. Frozen into the very fabric of time. And all of them, every single one, led in one direction. Inside the cave. Look around, I ordered, and I slowly walked along the chain of tracks. They belonged to different people. There was a long, confident stride, probably the commander. There were smaller tracks, someone was mincing, perhaps carrying heavy equipment. I walked around the perimeter of the entrance. I walked around it to the left, to the right. The result was the same. Not a single track leading back. Not a single one. Volkov? I called. There are no other entrances, Comrade Major, the sergeant responded dully. The rock is monolithic. There is only one exit. The one they entered. My mind, trained to search for logical explanations, began to work feverishly. A collapse? Could it have sealed the exit? But then why was there no trace of the search party that was supposed to have been sent? Another, unknown exit that was later blocked? Possible, but unlikely. And why was there complete silence in the case? Unique cryopreservation. Artemiev broke the silence. He knelt down by one of the tracks, almost touching it with his nose. Do you understand what this means? No weathering, no erosion. These prints could have been left yesterday or 100 years ago. This is the perfect laboratory for studying the past. We need to understand why no one came out, Professor, I interrupted. My tone was harsher than I intended. Volkov, you said the locals were afraid of this place. Why? The sergeant paused, as if choosing his words. The old people say it's Yusadon, the soul eater. They say the mountain takes away heat. Not from the body, but from within. A person goes in and feels so good, so calm, that he doesn't want to leave. He just sits down and waits. Nonsense, Artemiev snorted, rising to his feet. Primitive animism. There's a scientific explanation for everything. There's probably a release of some kind of natural gas in the cave. Colorless, odorless. Causes euphoria, then suffocation. A classic case. I looked at the tracks, then at the dark cavern. The gas version sounded plausible. Rational. It would explain the lack of panic and perhaps even the strange words in Gorin's radiogram. But something inside me resisted this explanation. It was too simple. Too convenient. It did not explain the main thing, why the all-powerful NKVD was so afraid of ordinary gas that it preferred to bury this story in the archives. The moment my torch went out, reality cracked. The blue glow emanating from the ice grew brighter, pulsing in time with a slow, inaudible beat. The silence in the grotto thickened, but now there was sound. It wasn't noise in the usual sense. It was echoes, phantoms, echoes of what had already happened. Sucks out energy. Artemiev's distorted, slow voice came from the darkness. But the professor's lips were motionless. He stood there, petrified, looking at his extinguished instruments. There's only one way out, Volkov's icy whisper rustled in my ear, although the sergeant himself was 10 meters away from me, pressed against the ice wall. These were our own voices. Phrases spoken minutes ago now floated in the air like oil slicks on water. They were stuck in that viscous, cold ether, repeating over and over. The cave was recording us. It was tasting us. What's going on? Artemiev finally came to his senses. He shook his head, as if to clear away a vision, and turned on his spare headlamp. A thin beam picked out my face from the semi-darkness. Major, did you hear? An acoustic anomaly. An echo trapped in the crystalline structures of ice. We need to record it. This is... He didn't finish. His gaze focused on something behind me. The scientific excitement on his face was replaced first by surprise, and then by a blissful, almost childish smile. What perfect form, he whispered, stepping forward past me. Perfect symmetry. Pure entropy, crystallized. I turned around. Artemiev was walking toward one of the frozen NKVD soldiers, the one squatting by the box. But he was not looking at the figure, but at an ordinary, unremarkable piece of ice at his feet. In the professor's eyes, this piece of ice seemed to shimmer with all the colors of the rainbow, promising to reveal the secrets of the universe. "Professor, stop!" I shouted, but my voice was drowned out in this space. Artemiev didn't hear me. He knelt down before the ice shard, as if before an icon. He took out a magnifying glass, a notebook, and began to scribble something quickly, muttering formulas and terms under his breath. He completely disconnected from reality. The cave had found his weakness, his scientific obsession, and given him the illusion of the greatest discovery. It had given him what he desired most of all, and in return it had begun to slowly absorb him. I turned my gaze to Volkov. The sergeant stood motionless, his face deathly pale in the light of the blue glow. He did not look at the frozen figures or at the maddened professor. He was staring into the dark abyss of the corridor from which we had come. His eyes were wide open, frozen in horror. "Volkov! What do you see?" I came up and shook him by the shoulder. He shuddered, his gaze slowly focusing on me. They are coming," he croaked. "Faceless. In our greatcoats. They are coming for us." I pointed my spare flashlight into the darkness of the corridor. Emptiness. Smooth icy walls and nothing else. "There's no one there, Sergeant. This is a hallucination. Pull yourself together." But Volkov wasn't listening to me. His body was shaking violently. "They're not coming. They're waiting. Waiting for us to become like them." The cave had found his vulnerability, too. Not fear of a flesh-and-blood enemy, but a deep, subconscious terror of the unknown, of losing himself. For him, a man of function, a man of orders, there was nothing more terrifying than to dissolve, to become part of this silent, motionless order. And then I was left alone. The cold grew stronger, turning into physical pressure. The apathy I had been fighting came rushing back with renewed vigor. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a thought. An alien but compelling thought that was ringing in my head. "Why fight, Major? Aren't you tired? The constant orders, the reports, the lies, the secrets of others, the deaths of others. Don't you want to rest? Look at them. They don't suffer. They have found peace. Absolute, eternal peace, the likes of which you've never known. No more responsibility. No more decisions. Just silence. Stay. It's so simple." The voice was gentle, understanding. It promised deliverance. And I, for one terrible moment, gave in. My legs gave way. I sank to the icy floor. The struggle really did seem pointless. All my theories, gas, sabotage, mass insanity, crumbled in the face of this monstrous, incomprehensible reality. I looked at the frozen figure of Lieutenant Gorin. He sat with the phone to his ear. And suddenly I understood. He wasn't trying to call for help. He was listening. He was listening to the same voice that was now whispering to me. And he agreed. They all agreed. It wasn't murder. It was an offer they couldn't refuse. The cave, or whatever lived in it, was not a predator that killed to satiate itself. It was a collector. An ancient, inscrutable entity for whom time, consciousness, will were simply forms of energy. It did not destroy them. It absorbed them, storing them in its eternal, motionless collection. Lieutenant Gorin and his men were not victims. They were exhibits. They willingly gave up their last moments, their thoughts and feelings, in exchange for eternal peace. It was this realization, its monstrous unnaturalness, that tore me from my stupor. This was not peace. This was annihilation of personality. The worst of all possible deaths. Adrenaline rushed into my blood, dispelling the icy apathy. I jumped to my feet. Volkov. Artemiev. My voice sounded hoarse, but firm. Rise. I ran up to the professor and roughly snatched the notebook and magnifying glass from his hands. He looked at me with an incomprehensible, offended look. Major, you don't understand. I'm on the verge of a discovery. You are on the threshold of eternity, Professor. I grabbed him by the collar. And you won't like it. There was a cracking sound behind me. I turned around. One of the frozen NKVD soldiers, the one who had been reaching for the lock of the box, was slowly turning his head in our direction with a crunching sound like breaking ice. His dead, clear eyes were looking straight at me. And there was no hatred in them. There was only a cold, indifferent invitation. The crunch of breaking ice, which had nothing of the natural sounds in it, struck the nerves like an electric shock. The frozen soldier, who a moment ago was only part of a terrible still life, slowly, with inhuman, viscous smoothness, turned his head in our direction. His movement tore the very fabric of reality. This was not a living dead man. This was something worse. This was eternity, which noticed our presence and expressed its icy displeasure. The invitation turned into a demand. At that moment, something snapped inside me. The animal instinct, the will to live that I had long thought buried under layers of cynicism and duty, roared inside me, drowning out the icy whisper of apathy. This peace was a lie. It was a prison for the soul, eternal, sterile, silent. And I was not going to become its new exhibit. Out! My scream tore through the viscous silence, and it contained all the rage and fear that I had been storing up inside. Everyone out! Now! I rushed to Artemiev. He was still kneeling, looking at me with resentment, as if I were a barbarian who had destroyed his temple. They are moving, he muttered. Kinetic energy from nowhere. Major, this is a revolution in science. We must record it. We will only register our own death, Professor. I grabbed him by the collar of his jumpsuit and yanked him up with all my might. He was heavy, his body limp, unwilling to submit. The cave held him, and it wasn't a physical grip. It held his mind. I dragged him along like a sack. His legs dragged on the ice. I turned to Volkov. The sergeant stood with his machine gun raised, aiming at the turning figure. His finger trembled on the trigger. Volkov, don't shoot. I yelled. Bullets are useless here. This is not a target. Cover the retreat. That's an order. The word order worked. It was the anchor that was able to keep him in reality. The discipline driven by years of drill overcame the primal terror. He shuddered, blinked, and for a moment, understanding flashed in his eyes. He lowered the barrel and, backing away, began to retreat towards the exit, keeping his sights on not one, but several figures that began to move slightly in the blue twilight. And then the cave began to resist in earnest. The path back, which seemed like a straight corridor to us, began to distort. The walls seemed to shift, narrowing the passage. The icy floor became slippery, as if soaked. Each step required incredible effort, as if we were walking against a powerful current. And the whispers in my head turned into a choir. "Fool," he whispered in my own voice. "Where are you running? You can't run away from yourself. From fatigue, from meaninglessness. Here you can end it all. Honestly. With dignity. Vitya, stay with me." Suddenly the voice of my mother, who died 10 years ago, sounded in my head. It was so alive, so warm, that I stumbled for a moment. I saw her in front of me. She was standing at the end of the corridor, in a simple cotton dress, and beckoning to me with her hand. "It's a lie," I croaked, shaking my head. "A hallucination." I dragged the limp Artemyev along, who was muttering something incoherently about entropy. Volkov walked behind us, breathing heavily. His face was distorted. "They're behind us. Comrade Major, they're coming," his voice broke. I didn't turn around. I knew that if I did, I would see something that would break me too. We had to move only forward. Towards the saving spot of slightly less dense darkness that marked the exit. The corridor seemed to have no end. It stretched like rubber. The voices grew louder, more insistent. They promised everything we wanted. To Artemyev, recognition and the Nobel Prize. To Volkov, oblivion of the horrors of war, a quiet village and peace. To me they promised the most terrible thing, forgiveness. Forgiveness for all the orders I had carried out, for all the destinies I had broken, for all the filth in which I had lived. It was the most sophisticated, the most brutal blow. The desire to give in became almost physical pain. My muscles were burning, my lungs were bursting from the icy air. I almost let go of Artemyev's collar. I was ready to fall. And at that moment I saw the tracks. Our own tracks, which we had left on the way here. They were clear, distinct. Proof that we had been here before. Proof that the exit was real. It was the only truth in this world of lies and illusions. "Look at the tracks, Volkov," I shouted, staring at the prints of our boots. "Don't look around. Only at the tracks." Step by step. We moved like automatons, looking at our feet. We walked along a thin thread of reality, thrown across the abyss of madness. Behind us, there was a crunch and shuffling. The collectors were seeing us off, not wanting to let us go. The last meters were hell. The light outside did not get any brighter. It seemed as if the cave itself was devouring him. I felt my consciousness slipping away. I was dragging Artemyev out of sheer stubbornness, on my last legs. And here we are at the very exit. Bright, blinding daylight hit my eyes. I tripped over the threshold and fell out of the darkness onto the snow, pushing the professor's body in front of me. A second later, Volkov collapsed next to me. We lay in the snow, gasping for breath. The -40-degree air seemed like African heat. It burned our lungs, but it was honest, living pain. I rolled over onto my back and looked at the black mouth of the cave. It was still emitting a sepulchral, inhuman cold. But the voices had died down. The show was over. We escaped. We didn't win. We didn't destroy the threat. We simply broke out of the cage, leaving the door open behind us. I looked at my companions. Artemyev lay unconscious, his chest heaving weakly. Volkov sat in the snow, his head in his hands, rocking back and forth like a child. His machine gun lay nearby. All I felt was emptiness. And cold. But this time it was a different cold. The cold of knowing what we were up against. And knowing that a piece of that absolute, entropic peace would stay with me forever. In my memories. In my nightmares. We lay there in the snow for perhaps a few minutes, but to me it seemed like an eternity. Time, stretched and distorted in the icy belly of the mountain, was reluctantly returning to its usual course. I was the first to come to my senses. My body ached from the strain, but my mind was frighteningly clear. The clarity of a man who has looked into the abyss and seen it looking back. Artemiev was the second to wake up. He sat up, looking around in bewilderment, and pressed his hand to his forehead. My head is splitting. What happened? I remember how we entered the grotto. I saw figures. And then, a gap. As if someone cut a piece out of my memory. Probably oxygen starvation, the sudden change in pressure took its toll. He was already looking for a rational explanation. His mind, unable to accept the monstrous truth, simply erased it, protecting itself. He did not remember the living statues, nor the voices, nor his blissful madness by the piece of ice. For him, the last half hour simply did not exist. Volkov was worse. He had not lost his memory, he had lost himself. He sat, hugging his knees, and stared at one point with an unseeing gaze. His face, which had been an impenetrable mask before, was now the face of a broken man. He remembered everything. And this knowledge was heavier than any wound. I called him over, but he did not react. I touched his shoulder, he flinched, as if from a blow. The soldier who had been through fire and water was destroyed not by a bullet, but by silence. The roar of the approaching helicopter sounded like a hymn to civilization, like salvation. The pilots, seeing us, landed quickly. They helped us load the almost insane Artemiev and the indifferent Volkov on board. I went in last, casting a farewell glance at the black mouth of the cave. It was still silent and motionless. It had taken nothing from us by force. It had simply offered a gift, and we, in our ignorance, had refused it. The return flight passed in oppressive silence, broken only by Artemiev's mutterings about the need for a new expedition with more serious equipment. I did not argue. I knew that there would be no new expedition. Ever. 2 days later I was standing in General Smorodin's office again. The office itself seemed unchanged, the same smell of tobacco, the same oppressive silence, the same clock measuring out official time. But I had changed. The general was still looking at me intently, but now I felt I could withstand that gaze. I had seen worse things. Your report, Major. He pointed to a blank sheet of paper and a pen lying on the table. I sat down and began to write. And I lied. I lied coldly, methodically, and convincingly, as I had never lied in my life. I was not just an officer, I was a gravedigger. I buried the truth as deeply as I could. My report did not mention stasis, the echo of eternity, or a peace worse than death. I wrote about completely different things, couching them in scientific but understandable terms for the Commission. I wrote about unpredictable, massive emissions of methane and other inert gases from the bottom of the cave, causing instant asphyxiation and hallucinations. I mentioned unique cryogenic conditions that led to the phenomenal preservation of the bodies of Lieutenant Gorin's group, but emphasized that these same conditions made any stay inside mortally dangerous. I presented Professor Artemiev's loss of consciousness and Sergeant Volkov's acute stress reaction as a direct consequence of a short-term but powerful neurotoxic effect of an unspecified gas. My lie was perfect. It was plausible. It explained all the facts without touching on their essence. And at the end, in the recommendations section, I wrote out in clear, firm handwriting what all this was for. 1. To recognize the object, Morozko, as not subject to further study or use due to the extreme and unpredictable danger to personnel. 2. The entrance to the facility is to be sealed by targeted blasting of the rock in order to ensure complete and irreversible preservation. 3. The coordinates of the object, Morozko, and all materials on case number 00-148 are to be transferred to the category of top secret and transferred to special storage without the right of access. I finished, signed it and pushed the report to the general. He read for a long time, without stopping. Then he raised his heavy eyes to me. There was no surprise or doubt in them. Only silent understanding. He had received what he wanted, a rational explanation and a reason to close this terrible page forever. "You are dismissed, Major," he said shortly. "Your recommendations will be carried out as soon as possible." I walked out of the office feeling his gaze on my back. The order was carried out. A week later, the sappers blew up the mountainside. Thousands of tons of rock and permafrost buried the entrance to the cave. The secret was sealed. Professor Artemyev was sent to a closed sanatorium with a diagnosis of nervous exhaustion. He still writes angry letters to the Academy of Sciences, demanding that they organize a new expedition to the unique geological phenomenon, but no one listens to him. Sergeant Volkov was discharged. He went to a remote village and, they say, has not uttered a word since. And me? I got promoted. I did my job. I'm a good cleaner. But sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, when the bustling life of Moscow fades outside the window, I close my eyes and find myself there again. I feel that cold. Not the kind that freezes your skin, but the kind that penetrates your soul. The cold of absolute zero. And I hear it whisper. It no longer offers me rest or oblivion. It simply states a fact. It says that it is the final state of all things. The inevitable end to which every star, every planet, every living cell strives. We did not defeat what dwells in the mouth of the ice spirit. We simply fled, cowardly blocking the door with stones. But I know that it has not gone anywhere. It is there, deep in the earth. It is waiting. It has eternity in reserve. And the most terrible part of my protocol of silence is that a piece of this piece has remained in me forever. It lives in my memory, like a shard of eternal ice in my heart. And I know that one day, when I am very tired, this shard will begin to grow.